I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded today, the Wiradjuri people, my people. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge our elders, past, those that watch over, guide and protect us, present, those that walk beside us, nurture and teach us the way, and future, the young ones that will succeed us into the future. I would like to acknowledge our continued connection to the lands, the waterways, and the skies, our animals, plants, and fauna. I would like to acknowledge our history. In story, song, and dance, we continue to share these stories. I would like to acknowledge each and every one of you. And I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which you tune into today, where you sit, where you live, where you work, and where you play, and how important it is for us to acknowledge where we are at this very moment. Mandangu, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny, host of It's Not About the Money, and my guest today is Julia Newbold. Julia is an award-winning freelance writer, thinker, and speaker. Julia has more than 20 years' experience in financial journalism, has previously been managing editor of Money magazine, and in 2020 published her first book, The Joy of Money, which she co-authored with financial advisor Kate McCallum. Julia understands the importance of sharing money stories, of demystifying the financial jargon, and communicating and talking about finance in a way that people can understand. In our conversation today, Julia reflects on her career, the changes she has seen, and the practical ways that we can support and achieve gender financial equality. Julia, thank you so much for joining us on It's Not About the Money podcast. Can we start by finding out what lands you live and work on?
Thank you. Great to join you today. I live on Gadigal lands, the lands of the Eora Nation.
If we could start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm a journalist by background, and I've worked as an editor for a very long time. I work in financial services, mainly with financial advisors, but also in the superannuation sector. And I have worked in consumer world as well. So, whenever I write or organise events and so on, I'm always thinking of finance from the general public's point of view. It's always about the consumer for me, even if I'm writing for advisors or superannuation funds, because the members or the clients are the most important. My current role has me doing an editor role, but putting together conferences. So for the superannuation experts, the CIOs, the chief investment officers, and also financial planning events for financial planners. So it's like editing a magazine, but it's live with, people attending.
And I'm sure with a few extra pressures that come with that.
Oh, yeah.
Doing things live.
Will everybody turn up? Will everybody ready to speak? Will anyone get COVID? All those sorts of things.
And will the technology work?
Absolutely, yeah. That's my least favourite part of it, because that's the one I have no control over.
That would be really interesting, though, in that role, particularly having written for consumers, to then think about the topics that can sometimes be quite technical, but make them understandable, relatable, looking for specialists and speakers who are able to do that as well.
For me, being a communications person, it's always about getting the message across simply and cutting out the jargon where possible, and usually that's everywhere.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people hide behind jargon, so to make people explain exactly what they mean is important all the time. It's a better experience for everybody.
Are you doing what you thought you'd be doing when you were younger?
No, absolutely not. I don't know what I thought I'd be doing when I was younger, probably, becoming a princess, but, that didn't work out. For a long time then I wanted to be a dentist. I've gone through a lot of different ideas, but no, Unfortunately, I wasn't really a planner. I didn't really think about, what I would do in the next 5 years and so on. And it wasn't something that people did back then anyway.
What was the journey that brought you to where you are now?
So the journey that brought me to where I am started, I wanted to be a stockbroker. I went and did work experience at the stock exchange, and I thought that was fantastic and exciting, and obviously you could make a lot of money. So I went to university. I did economics. I then came out at a not great economic time, and I was a bit turned off anyway. So I went back to that experience at the stock market and the stock exchange, and I thought I liked what the PR person did. I thought that job was great and fun, and you got to meet a lot of people and talk about what you did, and you still had to have the knowledge, but it was different. But every job that I applied for said that I had to have writing experience. So I went to the local paper and got that writing experience. And from there, I didn't really look back. I just, I love journalism, and not just for the writing, but for the meeting people and understanding what makes people tick, and, getting to the bottom of stories and helping where you can. That's addictive.
So much of finance and financial services is about what makes people tick and why they do what they do.
Yeah. And, money is such an interesting topic. I think it's at the root of everything. When I meet people, I'm always interested, you kind of know from people's jobs what they earn. And I think, I wonder what they spend that on. I wonder what drives them. I wonder what their lives are and what they're aiming for. It's all connected.
You do have a 20-year career as a senior editor and journalist, writing for, as you've said, consumer and trade publications. What's been your experience being a woman in the financial journalism industry, especially during the early years of your career, and has it changed much?
Yes, it has changed quite a bit. I think to start with, I think if I didn't come into the industry with a degree, it would have been very difficult. If I hadn't understood the jargon, I might have been intimidated by it. And as a woman, I think that would have been very difficult. I think that there was always the situation, and not with other journalists, but with the financial industry, of people or men literally talking over my head at events about financial matters and so on. And I used to think, well, I'm probably better educated than you, and yet you're sort of talking down. And I think that set me up quite well to know that I knew what they were talking about because I understood the jargon, and so I couldn't, be called on that. And also the concepts aren't that difficult. I used to think that the jargon and so on were built up so that people could justify being paid a lot in the industry. As a journalist, it was, I worked in a room full of men, and the editors were always men, and the chief of staff and so on. And they were quite misogynistic at the time. I think that's changed quite a lot. And I think, there's more women, and, now that we've got the numbers, it is different. I think in financial services, there's still a great discrepancy between the number of men and women. But I think, the rules that have come in and so on and have made people think a little bit more about how they treat people has helped. But it's still difficult. If you go to a conference and you're quite outnumbered, and as a woman you're typically smaller than the men, if they're gathered in a group talking, it's hard to break into that conversation. And especially if you're shy and you're just starting out, it's quite difficult. And I think the other thing that's changed a bit is women are a bit more aware of other women, and I think they're helping them more. I think in the past you had women who were protecting their roles. They'd worked really hard to get them. They'd fought, in the gender wars to rise up, and I think they didn't let other women in as much. But I think now we're kind of realising that we have to work together to get ahead, so that's better.
I think it is something I've observed in recent years, and something that's really exciting and certainly didn't exist as much when I was a financial advisor, is that cohort of younger women especially, who are such champions of each other, who are really forging careers in their own way, doing things based on their own values. And that really excites me, because as much as they're still facing some challenges in the industry, they are really just doing it on their own terms and doing it so well and being successful and being recognised for that. It's really exciting to see.
It really is, because, even to this day, I hear examples all the time of people saying that they didn't know they could be it because they couldn't see it. And I think now that there are role models, it will help the industry really build up.
What do you think are some of the key challenges that still face women as participants in the financial services industry, whether that's as advisors or in other roles, employed roles, or as clients?
I think that one of the challenges is the numbers are still low. So, everything's coordinated around male behaviours, male working places, etc. And I think sometimes it gets tiresome if you're in an organisation where there's a bit of a boys' club attitude. You get to a certain age and you're fed up, you've fought it long enough and that's it. And I think that is still a challenge. And I don't think that it's done intentionally. I don't think, men are trying to gang up against women, but the behaviours of going to the pub in the afternoons when women might have to go home and look after the kids or just don't want to go and have a drink, it's still difficult to hear the gossip and maybe know what jobs are around and be offered them. So I think there is still a bit of misunderstanding about how equality can be achieved. I think there's a lot of things that need to be changing, but it's happening. What you said earlier about, lots of young women in the industry now and they're helping each other and so on, I think that's really important. I think as women, we just don't promote ourselves. And I think we just don't, and I don't think we should be forced to. I think there should be an understanding that maybe women help each other and maybe, you talk up someone else and they talk up someone else and there's a bit of a wing woman thing happening because it's just not our nature. And I think that should be recognised in interviews and, in workplaces that women are going to behave differently. And so they should, because diversity is the important thing. It's not just about having equal numbers of men and women. It's about having diversity of thought because that's where the real benefits come into any workplace.
On that note, you are a co-founder and head of the Stella network, which was initially established 10 years ago by the BT Financial Group and has recently been relaunched by Professional Planner. What was the motivation for this network?
So the motivation was that there were the dealer groups, the licensees under BT, and they used to have conferences once a year. And there were a small number of women at these conferences that really got a lot out of meeting the other women in the network. And several of them were from regional areas and they didn't have natural networking opportunities with others. And understanding their need and the benefits they got out of this communication, understanding what their frustrations were in business, whether it was hiring new staff or just managing staff or getting clients or whatever it was, they really got a lot of benefit when they got together. So the idea was for these groups to get together on a more regular basis and try and figure out things that appealed to them, whether it was educational events or whether it was just pure networking or whether they just helped each other when they could. But what we then understood was it wasn't just within the BT group that these issues were coming up. It was everywhere. And we thought it would be more beneficial to open it up and get more people involved. And it wasn't exclusive just for women to join. It was for people who believed strongly in diversity and wanted to help. But the events were organised in such a way that they were a little bit more appealing to women. And also I found that in a situation where you had just women learning, there would be a greater propensity to ask questions and be more vocal if it was just women. Once men entered that, women sort of took a bit of a back seat and the men spoke up more. So it was a little bit preferable to have women-only events to give them the opportunity to ask the questions that they wanted and to just have a bit more vibrancy in the room.
And that really taps into the idea of creating safe spaces for people to be able to ask questions, for people to be able to be authentic, and particularly in a professional context. I think there are additional pressures that come into that, don't there? Sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you said, it's not just about gender, it's about the whole range of diversity that we need to be supporting.
Yeah. And, especially for the younger women, they really needed to have that safe space and to ask, what the challenges were for other women. And, sometimes it comes out that it's a bit gender and we're against men, and it's not about that. It's just wanting to promote women.
I find that interesting, like when we use the term feminist, that feminist is often conflated with being a misandrist. I certainly don't hate men. I'm a passionate feminist, though, because I believe in equality and I believe in dismantling the systems that result in inequality, not just for women, but in all the intersectional factors. It's a shame that we can't promote things like the Stella Network or other initiatives that are designed to address the inequalities that exist without being seen as hating men or hating the structures.
Yeah. And that's right. And it was nice to see. I recently went to the FAAA conference in Adelaide, and it was nice to see real diversity coming through the industry, whether it's cultural or geographic or socioeconomic. I think all of that is really important because, to serve the clients we want to serve, you need to understand where they're coming from and what the issues are.
Unless our advisor network reflects the basis of the community, there's always going to be gaps, and it's going to lead to people being disengaged in the process. And that's a shame, because we know that when people get professional advice, it improves their financial position over the long run.
It's one of the things that I felt very passionately about at Money Magazine was giving people who wanted to learn more about money the opportunity. Some people are born into families where money's talked about a lot, where they've already got a head start, and just being able to have the information to help people get to that level, I think, is important for equity.
Also understanding that people bring those different values to money. Particularly, there are different cultural perceptions about money and the way money is managed, and it's not all about being an individual approach to money or focused on the individualistic approach, but sometimes that collective approach, and that sometimes gets missed out when we talk about finances, because there is an assumption that there is one way to do it, and there's not.
Absolutely.
Now, you have built a strong reputation for knowledge and understanding, particularly in the areas of financial planning, superannuation, wrapped platforms, self-managed super. On a personal level, how has your work in financial journalism and advocacy shaped your views on money, financial planning, and overall financial well-being?
I think financial well-being is essential to well-being generally. I think if you're not financially secure, it leads to all sorts of issues. If you're worried about losing your job, it's not about the job, it's about losing the income and paying your bills. In relationships, it's about, can you afford to not have this relationship or have this relationship? I think, I always say to women, you need to have some sort of independence, whether you're in a relationship or not. And I think the same for men. I think you shouldn't be tied down to something just for financial reasons because you haven't thought it out. So I think with money, it's all about having an understanding of what's going on at all times. That's really important. And I don't think anyone should disregard it because it's too hard or so on. I think it's essential for everybody to have an understanding. And that's, where I'm always coming from. It's important to know, should you get this loan, or can you afford this house, or can you afford this car, and all of that. For myself, working in the industry, even when I was freelancing, I was very aware that I needed to put in money into my superannuation. Now, I know a lot of people in my position, and particularly if they weren't working in the financial industry, would not do that. And, the cash flow as a freelancer can be a little bit precarious. And I think it's important for people to understand, and they don't. And so I feel like I always want to tell people, you're on this great contract. Are you putting money into your superannuation? And I've seen disasters happen because people aren't, maybe having separate accounts for their tax when they're freelancing or contracting. And I think there's just so many little things that aren't complex, but it's just not in people's views when they're not dealing in this industry. And I think because of the jargon, and because it's always been entrenched, the jargon, people turn off, even though they understand the concepts and they're mathematically capable. Once you sort of put a finance bent on it and you start talking with the jargon, I think it puts people off, and I think that's really sad.
Was that desire to make information more accessible, to demystify the jargon, part of the motivation for writing your book, The Joy of Money, which you wrote with Kate McCallum?
100%. Yeah, we had discussions. We had a lot of chats over lunch talking about, our friends and our colleagues and what sort of situations they were going through. And at the time I was working in marketing, wrote about superannuation and so on, and we'd look around and say, who opens their superannuation, letters when they come in the mail or email, whatever. And we thought people just aren't focused on money as such. They're looking at their superannuation as something over there. It's only when you want to do something else in your life, well, particularly for women, The Joy of Money was targeting women because that's where we were coming from and that's who we thought we could best communicate with. We thought that until you want to make that change in your life, you leave the money over there. So if you're not happy in your job, or you're not happy in your relationship, or you want to work less, or you want to move house, or whatever it is, that's when you start thinking, okay, where am I? What is my financial position right now? Can I make that change? Can I afford to make that change? If I can't, what do I need to do to get there? And so that was the idea behind the book. And we made a decision, before we started, that we'd have no jargon. We'd explain things so that the concepts were all simple, which we believe they are. And, we wanted people to feel confident and not necessarily to do things themselves, but to at least feel they had the knowledge to go to a financial advisor, that they weren't going to ask stupid questions. These are the sorts of questions they might want to ask. These are the sorts of things they need to answer. When you're estate planning, this is the sorts of things you need to look at. That's where we came from when we wrote the book. And what surprised us was, although we wrote it for women maybe around 40, because we thought that's when you're starting to think, all these life changes, the children are growing up and so on, we found that because we launched in March 2020, when everything locked down, a lot of younger women were interested as well, because people were concerned, could they afford to live? Were they going to keep their jobs, etc.? So that was one of the surprises that we had.
One thing I really love about your book is it has profiles of ordinary, everyday women, many of whom have faced significant changes in their lives, whether that's been redundancy or changes in relationships, things that often commonly happen, as you say, that 40-plus age group. And often that age group does get overlooked. How important is it for us to hear those experiences of women and their money stories?
Yeah, it's very important, and I'm glad you picked up on that. One of the messages was that we wanted to get across was, do not look back. Do not, punish yourself for whatever decisions you've made in the past. It doesn't matter because you're here now. Just look forward. This is, what you want to do from here. This is what you're capable of. What has happened in the past, you can't change it. So don't look back. And also, everybody has different experiences. You might be earning more as a young person and being able to put more aside at that point, or you might, be earning more later on in life. There are different reasons why your superannuation balance might be different. And we just wanted to make women understand that it's acceptable. It's okay. Whatever you've got is okay. This is the reality, and let's work on the reality, because when you compare yourself to anybody, someone will be worse off, someone will be better off, and what good does that do? So we wanted to show there's different ways of managing and that they're all okay.
I love that saying that says the best time to invest was 20 years ago and the second best time is today.
Yeah.
And I think that is such an important message, especially for women, to say it does not matter. As you've said, what has happened in the past, it's about what happens now and the choices you make from this moment, whether you're 20, whether you're 40, whether you're 60. It's about taking control in this moment. That really is the important thing. So what did you learn from speaking with those women?
It was just interesting to hear that people beat up on themselves so much. You know, when it comes to finances, people have this real guilt that they don't know what they're doing. They didn't understand. They could have done better. And there's that fear also. You know, I've had friends of mine, they go to a financial advisor, they get a plan written, and for some reason they don't follow the plan. Something goes wrong in their life. They might lose their job, whatever. And then they're really frightened to go back. There's a lot of guilt around money, and that's unfortunate.
I'm sure that some of that stems from the fact that traditionally we have been discouraged from talking about money. It's one of those things that we're told not to talk about. But we need to, don't we?
We really need to. And, you know, your friends probably know more about your sex life than they do about, you know, what you're earning and what you're spending and what you owe. You know, that's just stuff we don't talk about because, yeah, it's which is first, the guilt or, you know, the fact that we just don't talk about it.
It's something I really encourage people to do, to have the conversations with the little people in their lives, to have conversations with their sisters, the mothers, to really normalise asking questions, finding out, having those conversations. And one thing I know, like superannuation is one of those things that's often, well, it is filled with jargon, right? And filled with what seems to be complexity. My favourite consumer workshop to run is my super boot camp, because and it's primarily women, come along and I ask the question, who loves super? And nobody puts their hands up, and I promise them that by the time they leave, they will. And it is amazing the shift that happens when we just start unpacking those terms. And, you know, the focus of that is being able to read your statement when it arrives in your inbox or in your mailbox so that you understand what contributions are and insurance and fees and how money's invested. So it's not in the advice space, but just simplifying that and encouraging people to talk about it is such a powerful tool. And we need to be doing that more in everyday life, right?
Yeah. For International Women's Day this year, I spoke to a group of women and I was really surprised. I asked the question at the beginning, how many people know how much money's in their super? 100% of the women put their hand up. I was completely shocked. It was varied ages, but, you know, a lot of young women, you know, between 25 and 35 really knew what was in their super, whether they had insurance. And I thought, isn't that great?
That's what we want everybody to have, right? Because, especially because super, it is something that people often think, oh, that's down the track or it's not really my money. It is their money, and the more that they can understand about it and take control of it now, regardless of their age, the better off they're going to be. That just is brilliant. That's what we want everyone to do.
And I think generally money matters. Like, you know, someone asks you out for the weekend and whatever, and it's a bit expensive. I think you need to say it. I can't afford it this week, or can we do something cheaper? I think there needs to be just more discussion generally about people's financial health, because otherwise you kind of get into these spirals where you're always thinking you've got to keep up and so on. And people understand. It's just that it's an awkward discussion for people.
I think particularly in the context now where so many people are struggling with cost of living pressures, and it's really tight for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you initially, when you wrote the book, were thinking of more mature women. What are some of the challenges that face older women that are specific to them in that lead up to retirement and in retirement?
You know, it's the lack of super, the lack of understanding money, some bad decisions perhaps that have been made. I think there's an age where there's not a lot you can do to change your situation. And I think, you know, the reality for some might be hard. There comes a time where you've got to decide whether you want to keep working as hard as you're doing, or you're going to make sacrifices such as share a house with somebody. I think if you're on your own and you know, we know that the greatest cohort of homelessness is women in over 50. There's not necessarily a lot of ways of making money, but I think there needs to be discussion a bit broader of maybe you can't afford to live in the city anymore. There needs to be some of those hard decisions. So I think putting your head in the sand doesn't help. I think you've got to face up with what your choices are. And for me, the idea of talking about money, and it's all choices. You know, if you want to stop working at a certain time, you've got to plan for that way before. You've got to have those savings, you've got to have the superannuation balance, etc. If that hasn't happened, your choices become more limited, but you do have choices. And I think people don't explore them enough and perhaps don't understand what they are.
In talking about that statistic around the growing rate of homelessness amongst older women, and that's a statistic that gets quoted a lot, but we often don't talk about some of the factors that play into that. So the impact of relationship breakdown, the impact of economic abuse, particularly the impact of women having the social expectations that women take on, those caring roles that women have traditionally worked in lower paid industries and worked part-time. The gender pay gaps, the gender super gaps that all come into play into this perfect storm that often then hits women in their 50s. How do we change that for women, younger women, for the future generations going through? What can we do to make sure that that statistic doesn't continue into the future?
I think there has to be an understanding of what happens. And I think there isn't really enough, unfortunately, talked about with relationship breakdowns. I think, you know, financial advisors, you talk about insurance and what will happen, you know, in a very small percentage of cases, but people will still take insurance up. But there's no discussion of what will happen if this relationship fails. And the statistics for that are a lot higher than, you know, any of the things that you're going to claim insurance for. I think, you know, people need to be aware that if you're taking the time out of the workforce and your partner's still there needs to be some equality in your superannuation balances. There needs to be some understanding also that if you do break up and, you know, somebody gets the house and somebody gets the super and whatever, you've got to look at, well, what are the implications of that? Can you really afford to manage a large house that's not generating an income, or is there a better way of structuring whatever you get out at the end of a relationship? But I think it's just being in control and understanding where the money is at all times is really important. And, you know, it sounds really boring and perhaps it is a little bit, but, you know, having a money discussion on a regular basis, you know, to make sure that you're both on track to whatever it is, I think it's really good for relationships because you've got similar values, or you work out whether or not you do have similar values. Someone isn't off spending ridiculously on a holiday that, you know, the other person might not be enjoying, or whatever it is. I think you've got to sort of continually check in to make sure that it's right for both of you. And I just think younger women, you know, you see your superannuation balance earlier, you're building that, it's yours, you know, you understand what sacrifices you need to make to be in a better position. But just being aware, I think, is the most important thing. Not expecting somebody else is going to do it for you, because even if there's no ill intent in any of it, someone might just not be as competent as you think they are.
That is a really important point. And I love that idea of those regular discussions. And I think encouraging people, you know, money, again, it's one of those things we don't like to talk about, but it's essential if you're in any kind of teamwork, relationship, partnership.
Yeah.
And relationships are no different.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, called a money discussion, but if you're both working for the same thing and you want to, you know, you're thinking of having an extension to the house or sending the kids to private school or whatever it is, and you're working out, okay, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to not have a holiday this year. We're going to put the money in for, you know, this extension. I think it's good to keep you both on track.
What are your thoughts on, now that we're talking about relationships, I'm a big fan of each person in a relationship having their own money, their own bank account that they can access, and particularly for women having that sense of financial independence and being able to grow their balance and make choices about their own money. Where do you sit with that?
Yeah, I agree with you totally on that one. I think you do have to have your own money. I think, you know, we're all grown-ups. If you want to go and spend something, you shouldn't have to, you know, check in, can I, you know, buy my sister this extravagant present, or, you know, can I help my mum, with her rent this month, or whatever it is. I think you need to have those separate accounts, and then have a middle account, which is for the bills, etc. And I think probably because more women might need it, you do have to have a bit of an escape fund in case things get really bad. You need to know that you can afford to leave a relationship at any time. And men need that as well. But I think, unfortunately, that's a bit of the insurance policy for relationships.
And we know that economic abuse is present in 99% of abusive relationships and it is such an invisible, often subtle form of abuse that is still abuse, but often isn't recognised as abuse, much like coercive control.
Yeah, and I think it's important for, to have your own credit card and to have your own banking details, etc., because they're difficult to get if you don't have a job and you're no longer in a relationship.
And it's not just in the case of relationship breakdown. If your partner dies, for example, you need to have access to your own money. It's actually a very practical thing.
Yeah.
That many people don't realise what happens to joint accounts when one partner passes.
You just have to be incapacitated for a while or stuck overseas in a COVID situation. You know that.
None of us really like to think about those what ifs, but they're really, really important conversations to have. I think similar to that, often when people are in relationships, and especially if there are children involved and one partner takes time off, and let's be honest, statistically that's women that do that. This idea that women valuing their contribution as unpaid carers, contributors to the household, that work is just as valuable. It enables the other person to be going out and earning an income. It's still joint income.
Yeah.
We really need to shift our thinking around that.
And that's another thing, when you're looking at the childcare costs and the woman's looking at it saying, well, if I go back to work, all my money's paid on childcare. No, all your money's not paid on childcare. Your money goes into that pool and this is the money that's paid for childcare. So I think, that prevents women working in a lot of cases, and it might stymie their careers, if they do take out more time out of the workforce than they really need to or want to.
And there are a whole heap of domino effects that come from that, which some of our other episodes are exploring. What initiatives, we talked a lot about what individual women can do, what we can do in relationships, but what initiatives or policies or financial products especially would you like to see developed to support women and especially older women in achieving financial security? What do you think needs to be done at that systemic level?
I think affordable housing is really important for all of society at the moment. So, not sure how to get that, except that I think government should focus on that. It is really important because, obviously we have the pension for people who, need it. But if you don't have a home, you're so far behind and there's no catching up, etc. I think that's one really important initiative that needs to be done. Personally, I think you shouldn't be allowed to drop maths in high school at any time. I think, learning maths and the way things work and making your mind work that way is really important, especially for women who then might lack confidence in looking at money because they feel that they haven't been educated enough. I think, it's a dangerous thing to be able to not be mathematically able. And I think other policies, I'm not sure. I just think there's simple things, and I think education's a big part of it. And just there's so many structures around financial advice and the provision and all the compliance, and I think that's probably too much, and it's stopping people being able to get financial advice. So perhaps, what the government's proposing now, which is to have more people able to give advice without the same qualifications, but to give lesser advice is probably a good thing.
It will certainly be interesting to see where that evolves in the industry and what that's going to look like, because access and affordability of advice is such a big issue at the moment.
And there's a lot of, especially women who've gone out as coaches, they want to help more women, you know, in a group. I think that's getting a younger cohort prepared to pay some amount for financial knowledge. And I think, you know, as advisors, often people are saying, well, you know, young people aren't prepared to pay this. Well, they pay it for the gym and they pay it for other subscriptions. So I think, you know, looking at coaching in financial matters is a good thing, and I hope that it takes off and more people take it up.
It has also been exciting to see a lot of those financial advice models evolve to incorporate coaching, not just outside of in the non-licensed space, but within the licensed space as well. It will be really exciting to see where that evolves. I think one issue that often doesn't get discussed in the industry enough is that longevity risk that women face, and the fact that we don't have a lot of financial products that really address the longevity risk for women, particularly given that women often have less accumulated prior to retirement. That's something that women really need to think about with longer life expectancies and the reality that they're likely to live a significant part of their retirement not with a partner.
Yeah.
Before we get to the concluding questions, are there any key messages that you'd like to share with people who are listening?
I guess it's just take more control over your money. You can, and I think it's important for your financial well-being and your overall well-being to know where you are financially at all times.
Can you share with us women who have inspired you and why?
It's a really tough one because there's, you know, lots of women who are inspiring and at different times as well. Obviously, you know, my mum is inspiring. She's always managed the household finances. She's on the ball. She's 88 years old now, and she still manages all her own finances. She's also a very strong woman and, you know, forged a way coming to Australia on her own and working her way up.
If you were Prime Minister for the day, what would be your number one objective with regard to gender equality and building women's financial security?
Look, it couldn't be done in a day, and this is very controversial, but I think to get real gender equality, single-sex schools are really unhealthy. I think it especially when the boys come out, they've just dealt with boys, they're competing with boys, they've got their networks done. Women are already starting behind the eight ball. And so, you know, that's something that I don't think you'll ever get true equality with.
It certainly reinforces the system of power and inequality.
Yeah.
And very interesting in the context of Newington College pushing back and not wanting to enter that co-ed space.
And I'm really quite shocked at women who are speaking against it, you know, promoting their sons somehow as needing to be in that protected environment.
But internalised misogyny is a thing. And I think when you are part of a system and you benefit from that system, you will act to reinforce that system even if it is harmful to others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the problems with patriarchy generally, is it's a very harmful system that benefits such a few, but it's harmful to men as much as it is to women in different ways.
Yeah.
We've covered off a lot about what women can do in their own circumstances, but what are 3 things women can implement today, 3 actions they could do today to make a difference in their financial position?
Well, one thing is to maximise their income. So whether that's asking for a pay rise, just making sure that they're earning what they're worth. So, you know, we get comfortable, we get nervous about asking for a pay rise, and we get comfortable in roles. You know, sometimes you need to just get up, move out, find somewhere else that might value you a little bit more, because you either have to save money or you have to earn more to have more money. So the other things, I guess, are saving more, like just being more aware. Kate and I often in the book talk about conscious spending. We don't want to say to anyone, don't buy this or don't spend money on this, but we do say, understand what you're spending and make sure that you are getting enough out of that expenditure to make it worthwhile. Like, don't just fritter the money away and not feel that you're benefiting from it. And the other one is, your superannuation, it's got all the benefits of compound interest, etc. If you can add more as you're younger, it is terrific. And, even if it's just a small amount, it makes a difference over the long term.
Apart from your book, which is such an easy read and so accessible, what are your other go-to resources that you would recommend to women who want to know more?
I guess it's just being aware of what the economy is doing. I think, read the financial pages where you can. There's a book that I've been reading at the moment, which is How to Have an Epic Retirement. So depending what age you are, looking at all the different bits that add to retirement, whether it's your health, your entertainment, etc. It's more than just money. And that's the message that we wanted to get across, that don't look at money as a discrete thing. It's just helpful in the way you want to live your life. So, read your statements that come in. Your superannuation fund usually has a lot of great information. Money Smart has great information. Money Magazine has helpful information.
They are fantastic tips. Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a great discussion and really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Jenny. Been great to talk to you.